Today, my guest on Fair Folk at Work is a star of stage and screen. And I am agog with excitement because my guest is Jeffrey Weissman.
Hi,
Well,
Dan.
hi, Jeffrey. And the reason why I'm agog, I'm going to beg for your indulgence and ask sort of an inside question. I was a reference librarian before I retired, and I've never talked with somebody who has their own Wikipedia page. How do you get a Wikipedia page? Who writes it? And do you have a secret decoder password that you can get in and edit it?
I guess I'm just lucky. Someone started one for me probably 20 some odd years ago. And I looked at it and I said, well, that's not right. That's all wrong. So I started submitting changes and writing stuff. And of course, it needs updating now. But yeah, because of being a public figure, I guess, from the various film and TV shows that I'm in, I have a Wikipedia. But I think anyone really could, you probably could start your own Wikipedia as a host of this podcast and for other works that you've done in your lifetime, and as even as a librarian.
Well,
I'm
they are very eclectic in their collection development policy, to use a librarian speak. But at any rate, thank you for that. Both validation and encouragement to claim my own spot on the internet, and more specifically, Wikipedia, as mine.
yes, when this planet is long gone and there's some little satellite out there with a little hard drive with Wikipedia on it, you'll be out there in a new universe. And when that other civilization that discovers that satellite cracks it and figures out how to read and decipher, you'll come into a new universe. And
Well, moving right along, um, tell me about the first day you went to fair and who was the person who said, come on, let's go?
I think it was in 73, and there were friends from school going, and I talked my folks into letting me go, and I was 14, I think, and really enjoyed the whole scene, climbing a tree and hanging out and shouting at people, acting silly, seeing the comedias and the performers and the pageantry and all. I was taken immediately by it, and I was determined the next season to get out there. So in 74, I borrowed my costume from a production of Merchant of Venice that I was doing at Santa Monica High School, and wore that and came out and played fair and just had a blast. I think I signed up. Did I sign up that year? No, I think in 73 I borrowed my costume and went out there and had a blast. I had in school dabbled in some Shakespeare in junior high and high school. That playing Lancelot Gobbo the clown and Merchant was very exciting for me, and my ego was a little full because an actor named Fritz Feld, who for some reason critiqued the show for the school newspaper, had picked me out of the cast. This young man's going somewhere, so I thought I could do Shakespeare now. And so out I went to the fair, where not only could you do Shakespeare, but sometimes as a kid you could flirt with the girls, and you could surreptitiously drink some beer and then play Shakespeare, play Elizabeth. And I loved it. I was immediately in love with it. The next year I started by going to workshops, trying to make some friends there, and was taken again by the fun of it. Certain things happened that showed me that it was not a very conservative society. There were people of all walks of life. There were plenty of hippies and outcasts. And
Do you remember any of your first street bits?
well, I have the distinct memory of at a workshop where people like Tom Westlake and Mark Celine and Dean Cameron, various other similar aged 15, 16-year olds were in a circle learning from Dennis Day how to greet and reverence and doff your hat low with the back leg bent and the front leg pointed straight. And out of his hat, when he doffed it, an ounce of pot rolled out. Dennis recovered very quickly and looked at us all and said, "You didn't see that." And I knew I was in a place that was pretty, how shall I say, it was open to things that I had already been partaking in. And that I was like, oh, thank God I probably can get away with being myself here. I immediately formed a Motley Fool character and had a costume made out of one of my grandparents' bedspreads, which was a rusty purple velvet. Was it? I think it was Dean Cameron who helped me make that.
So are you going for a scruffy wizard kind of look
No,
or?
no, it was pretty much a fool. I had
Mhm.
come up with a character from history, Simon Mortimer, the Mortimer family, which had been banished due to treason from, I think, King Henry's reign. And here I was trying to gain entrance back into the country and going under the name Lord Gunther Fudpucker, just a jester, just jesting for a jest. And to fit in and make some money, signed up to be a chair bearer. And so here's this scrawny 14, 15-year-old. I was assigned to Kim. There was African American girl named Kim, another African American girl named Cheryl, and then Peg Long as the queen. And Kim and Cheryl played ladies in waiting or the Medicis. And I was assigned to one of the second or third chairs. And for that, I was fitted for a chair bearer outfit, which I was led to believe was one of the Queen's Guard suits from Wizard of Oz that Phyllis had picked up at the MGM costume sale or something. So there was a bit of prestige and all that, and also the prestige of finally getting paid. I was getting paid, I believe, 6 food tickets a day.
You
So
got
I could,
6 food tickets? I
yes.
started with 5.
Well, did you carry a chair and
No,
105
I
degree
did
weather?
very little.
I kind of worked my tail off. Like I mentioned, some of those days were 100 plus degrees and very dusty, and you'd walk from the front gate or Procession Hill through to the main stage and then kneel the rest of the time. You had that gig, and then I would hawk. One of my first gigs was hawking for cheese wits,
Mhm.
cheese pies. And for that, I think I would eat and then use my other food tickets on strawberry shortcake or whatever, a turkey leg or whatever. What
And
else
the
did I do?
pickles, as I recall, were free.
Oh, and those pickles were fantastic. No, I think you had to pay for the pickle. They were $1 for that giant pickle.
If you knew the right people, and I don't mean to
Ah,
brag here, but
yeah.
there were some stashes of pickles behind certain stages that if you appeared sort of on the verge of sunstroke, they would feed you a pickle.
Quick, get some salt into them.
I believe that was the official justification for the pickle distribution network.
Well, I always wanted to act as long as I can remember. I had a babysitter that took me to my dad's club, who my dad either owned or managed various clubs in West Hollywood and Beverly Hills for backgammon. And I remember going with her when I was very young, maybe 6 years old or so, and meeting Omar Sharif at the club, and then later on seeing him on the big screen and watching my babysitter flip out. And I was like, I want to do that. If that's going to make her act like that, it was embedded in my little psyche for a long time. And so here I was able to act all day, make some money. So I was considering myself a professional now, and also party. I got immediately fell in with some real rascals like Kenny Milligan, who recruited me and a bunch of us other street performers to be in a bastonado, which was a recreation of foot slapping ceremony, and then end at the mountebank stage with a feast of fools, which there was whipped cream and wine, and a sermon was led by the cookie man, the fool that we
Mhm.
all know from the cookie booth. And it was just a riot and quite fun. And the show got closed because some conservatives saw it and thought it was a blasphemy on the church. Well, yes, but it was historically, as much as we knew, it did happen. So I was like, why did they close that show? I looked it up. The Bastonado, the Feast of Fools was a real thing.
Who did you observe acting out at the fair? Who was your role model?
I would get mentored, someone like Jay Simo, or sometimes some of the people that were in the Queen's procession would guide me give me some instruction or adopt me. Cheryl and Kim sort of adopt me at their camp up in Toad Hollow. I would watch. I remember when Peg took a weekend off to go have a biopsy or something for her illness. The first time Louisa Puig performed as the Queen, and there was this 6'6" or 7'2" giant man named Dundee who would lead, I think, as the Earl of Leicester at that time. And I remember him saying, "Darling, hold on, it's an e-ticket ride, a white knuckler," and I just loved the fun, the way he diffused her fear because she was scared to death, and quickly fallen in love with a show. Everyone was hot on Cock and Feathers, but there was a mountebank show that Patrick Porter and Louisa Puig performed in. I have the name of it here somewhere. Just a moment.
Well, let me talk for a minute.
Okay.
Louisa, I didn't know it at the time because I was basically fourth peasant from the back. But when I look back at it, she was excellent at bringing in the focus to whatever was presented to her. She would move it along with the right and then what happened comment. And
Yes.
then when it was over, she would very kindly have someone escort them off the stage. But I really learned from her how to be a ringmaster in a real subtle, tasteful. She never let any sign of what are these idiots doing in front of me, but
Yes.
was always the epitome of supportive.
I found the title of that show, I believe it was called The Mask of the Spheres. And Patrick, Louisa, and Mike Norris all came out of LACC theater department. And out of that theater department came quite a few of the folk like Robert Corredubius from the Commedia at that time. And I think the training that they had and the respect that they had, this Mask of the Spheres, it was a mountebank medicine show, Elizabethan times, and they produced from Reedy Peepee of Salamanca, Keeper of the Moon, this hermaphrodite who would sing, "My doctor, thank you. I think I'll sing a song." If it was male or female. It was hilarious, and I would find myself as many times as I could at that show because it was such an outrageously fun show that broke so many boundaries and lampooned so many things at the same time. And it was rapid fire language. And I love language. A few years down the line, I started playing Christopher Marlowe because I fell in love with his poetry. And they needed a Marlowe. And it happened to be the year Uncle Dave played Shakespeare. And of course, I'd have a battle of the tongue with Uncle Dave, poetry battle, which he would shred me. But it was at a time when Dave was fearless and could do no wrong, and such a gift of the gab. That for me was an inspiration to see these incredible, because I started working in court after auditioning a show. I co-wrote a show with a friend, hitchhiked with him to Northern California from Malibu to audition for Peg, Ernie, and Dennis. And we had written this thing that was all full of language. "Curse you from miserable Medusa's maidenhead, thou mongoloided octopussy, full of horse and wells, full of sound and fury, thou horse and on wells." Oh, I can't remember it, but it was all very witty puns. Oh, weren't we witty? And Dennis and Ernie and Peg actually laughed, and their jaws kind of hung open at the end of the thing. There's the story of this sailor who comes to confess to this monk, and they end up going to hayloft and sleeping together. At the end, their mouths were open. They were like, "What did we just see?" And they said, "You boys have talent and things are fun, but do something that the audience might get, maybe something a little less obscure or avant-garde." And so we said, "Well, what would you like?" And they said, "How about a parody of a Shakespearean piece?" And so we picked Tempest. And that got picked up, a chit for chat. There was a condensed burlesque on Tempest. And I started working in court and doing that show on stage. And in court, which I had already experienced through being in the Queen's Progress, I really got to get up close and personal with a lot of the members of court, like, Jay Warblenstein and Nicole Bobbitt and Bob and Margie and Samantha Johns and Tracy and Katya and Rachel. I mean, there were so many lovely people doing this who invested maybe $1,000 into their costume, and they were not paid. And then finding and researching the
exactly.
characters. To me, that was something from the heart that bound them all together. And I was brought in to their realm. I would go to the parties at Her Majesty's home for Wayward Wenches out in Pasadena that Katie Breckenridge and her mom would throw. And they were lovely affairs and a lot of fun. And we'd go out after the fair to the Ben Jonson in San Francisco. And then there was a place in Los Angeles, like in Sherman Oaks. And we'd even go in our costumes. And I remember, in fact, when I started doing Northern Fair, my family never would come see me at fair. My parents considered that I ran away from home to join the circus, which was very upsetting for me. But finally, I got my sister to come see me at Black Point. And Kevin Brown actually took to my sister. We went in our costumes after fair to ride a cable car. And that's a very nice visual I still have. And I remember being so happy that my brother came to see me at the fair, God rest him, at Black Point. And then he came to visit me at Dickens. My first Dickens in 78. Those were 12-hour days. Half the day was dancing at Fezziwig's End, playing Oliver Twist's evil brother, and then 6 hours as the White King in the Alice in Wonderland environment. Anyway, I digress from your questions. I can
That's
go on
okay.
tangents here and there. We were talking about being a celebrity. If I remember, was it John Davidson, TV game show host and Love American style guy? He had his own booth at Southern Fair. And so I would look for celebs that would cross over into the Renaissance. And I remember seeing Joni Mitchell one day and Bob Dylan. And I know,
I saw Joan Baez in the costume shed one year.
yeah, Joan was friends with the Pattersons. And Roseanne Arquette, who was in the Commedia at Fair, even brought Peter Gabriel to the fair. I thought that was pretty cool. I had a falling out with the folks in my senior year in high school in 75, 76, and lived on the fair site and would actually hitchhike Santa Monica to go to my senior year
You hitchhiked from Ogura to Santa Monica?
almost every day.
I'm going to show that I am an LA geek here. Did you take the 101 to the 405 over the hill, or did you cross like over to the beach in Malibu and take 101 back down the coast?
It all depended on the ride I'd get. I would sometimes find people who were going to the coast, Malibu Canyon. Other times I'd find people who would go as far as the 405. It was never an easy task.
Where
But
was
sometimes
the optimal place to catch somebody going either route? Where would you stick out your thumb?
at Wizen's,
Okay.
one morning, Marcellus Barnes, Jay Simo, and I went to Wizen's for breakfast before I headed out to school. And I noticed there was Johnny Cash having breakfast by himself at Wizen's. And the guys went to our table to sit down, and I said, I can't not thank Johnny for his music. So I stopped by. I said, Mr. Cash, I hate to interrupt your morning here. I just wanted to thank you for the music. And he says, well, what's your name? And I introduced myself. He says, well, sit down, have breakfast with me. And I said, well, I'm here with my friends. He says, well, bring them over. So the three of us had breakfast with Johnny. And I remember as I was leaving to go out to get to school, mainly for rehearsals, I was playing Falstaff in Henry IV, Part 1. I remember at that time. I remember Marcellus and Jay were twisting Johnny's arm to come out to the fair site. So many years later, I found out that in fact they were successful, and Johnny loved the fair site. He happened to be there for his daughter's graduation from high school and had time to kill. It was pretty cool. So I got to flash forward. For 15 years, I played Stanley Laurel and Charlie Chaplin and Groucho Marx at Universal. And they would loan the characters out from time to time for different events. And one evening, I got to escort the winners out for the Country Music Awards. And there was Johnny and June backstage. This must have been 91, 92, somewhere in there. And I waited till there was a quiet moment. I went up to Johnny and I said, Mr. Cash, I don't know if you remember, but we had breakfast together. And my name is Jeffrey. And he said, well, of course I remember you, Jeffrey. And I was like, oh my God, what do you think of Clint Black and George Strait and Highway 101? He goes, well, I don't know how many of them ever dug a ditch or spent time in jail, but I reckon they're all right. It's my celebrity story with fair there. Finding the celebrities that came before at fair has been really wonderful. Like at one of the anniversary, the 50-year anniversary, I think it was, they put up the recording of the live KPFK broadcast of David Ossman and Carl Reiner co-hosting the opening of the fair. And for like 6 hours, they hosted a live the fair day. And I thought that was pretty cool. The knowing that one of my idols, I'm a big improv fan, improvisational theater,
Right.
and Scott Beach, who played the Lord Mayor, who was in the committee. That I think is big celebrity time. Besides, David Ossman from Firesign Theater and Bob
Well,
Thomas.
what the fair did was it encouraged an audience that was out there to play, and that the performers then got a real positive feedback because you really couldn't fail. I mean, and if you did, there was another clump of people coming along 2 minutes later.
Yes, and there was seduction, there was sensuousness, there was revelry and pageantry, the beauty of the language. I love Reduced Shakespeare Company, how it evolved, but at the same time, I'm very sad that they did something at a period that the fair was turning a corner. When I started fair at workshops, Peg would run the BFA workshop, basic fair accent. You got a pamphlet that showed you how the syllables and vowels and everything were broken up or pronounced. And in recent years, there's this father-son team that do a production of whatever the Globe at Stratford is doing, and they do at least one show during the run in the first basic accent of the time period. So we had, as an example of how to pronounce the vowels in the sentences, the Lord's Prayer. So it would be, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Like this. And to hear, and you can find it on YouTube, these guys take the original text and put it in the original tongue. It changes the jokes. It makes things often more clear. And the fair, was pretty strict back then. People would hide when Phyllis was on her opening patrol before the fair would open to make sure everything that was covered with burlap or hay that might be modern. And then hearing stories of the flamenco dancers hidings because they were wearing shoes that were not period. Wait till Phyllis is gone, then we can wear a shoe. People were kind of scared of that because it was strict. And then with the advent of more modern shows, even though they were really good shows, Sound and Fury and Reduced Shakes and so on and so forth, they lost the BFA. And I think they did it because they wanted to be understood and wink, wink, modernize, cock
I
and
was
feathers that had some BFA in it, but were also punchline, 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 set up punchline, but tried to keep period.
I was part of the Reduced Shakespeare cohort, did some shows with those guys, and you're right. BFA went away. We would sort of more mimic BFA when it was convenient for a joke that would immediately resonate with the audience. But we were less, I'm going to say I was less concerned with being strictly 100% period.
Yeah.
I saw the advantage of it, but to me, fair at that point, it was a choice you would make to either go the BFA route or, for instance, I was a friend with Mark Sellen, or I still am, and we would sell like the New World. We would sell swamp property in the Loch Ness. And so
Fun.
we were pushing that boundary. And so we were much more concerned with the intersection of making new stuff with the veneer of fair stuff.
I fell in, did a few shows with Michael Harris, the No Comedia.
Mm-hmm.
No
What a great
Comedia.
idea.
And what they were doing was basically mashup of Samuel Beckett, Tom Stoppard, and Elizabethan and Commedia dell'arte. And it was pretty fun, free-formed, and often drug-infused. out there absurd theater, and it was really fun, indulgent, but it also, for me, who just fell in love with mind expansion through some indulgences, it became a playground for both theater and mind expansion at the same time. It was really quite cool, but it wasn't anywhere, period.
What I
So
always liked about it was establishing a connection with like somebody walking through the fair, a couple or a family or something, and then trying to sell them something that was ridiculous and sort of making their day because somebody talked to them, was silly with them. Whatever it was we were doing, we would let them win and they would go on with a big smile on their face. And that
yes,
to me was sort of the point of what I was doing out there.
and the street theater bits that worked. I remember this hunchback who was a leper, Tim
Uh-huh.
Nice, and he had a little sign that said "Poem for a Pence," and he would basically drool and be grotesque and get into your space and make you read the sign. And finally, someone would give him a penny or a nickel or whatever, and he would go from gibberish like, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Now, at more temperate and more rough winds do shake that." And he would do the sonnet and then go back to drooling and gibberish. It was a beautiful gig. And it was those type of bits. The one that Amy Hill did, I just remember being fascinated with this actress. She would start from the actors' camp behind Don Brown's, the Mulagushka's booth, Turkish coffee, and walk heel to toe, very slowly at the beginning of the day, get to the end at the graveyard at the southern tip of Southern Fair, turn around and walk very slowly, heel toe, all the way back. And that was it. She was just at that pace, mad modeling. And if you got into her vision, her realm of sense, she would break her daze stare and she would improvise a story. And I remember in particular one story of the nightmare, the horse that rides the skies at night through your dreams, and how he came to the keeper at the barn up in the sky with a baby wrapped up in his mane, and the gamekeeper said, "How is it that you brought this baby from his crib? You must take that baby back at once, right away, back to his crib. And if you should find yourself entangled in the nightmare's mane, you must hang on for all your might and ride it all the way back to your bed where you'll be returned safely, and you must trust it." Now, I've asked her if she remembers this story at all, and she says, "No, not at all." But it has stayed with me. What is it now? 45 years?
Well, that to me is really what the fair is kind of all about.
Well, I also celebrate, for me personally, my father's mother, my grandmother, was the only one in my family who ever encouraged me to act. My parents
Mhm.
didn't want me to act. They saw them gambling at their clubs and drinking and swearing. And they knew it wasn't a way for anyone to make a living or raise a family. But I still was determined. And my grandmother said, "Darling, don't let them tell you what to do. If it's in your heart, you do it." And I wanted to celebrate her and her English accent, her be an Anglophile, and celebrate that part of my family. And the fair allowed me to do that. I, for one fair, was part of the English country dancers doing the Death of John Barleycorn and various pageant plays. And I would also do Montague Capulet sword fight around the washer well with the washing women as our crowd control. One of the early influences were the biting wit, sharp tongues of the washerwomen in 73, 74. Dina Gornick, Elizabeth, I don't remember all the names, but they were fantastic actresses and sharp wits, and they could cut you to the bone, to the quick, very easily. It was really delicious to see strong women like that.
Has there been times in your life when you have used fair lessons in a non-fair environment?
Oh yes, of course. I still have stage fright or times where I'm self-conscious, or I can't get myself to be assertive in the ways that I've learned from doing the immersive theater, and other times where I use it full bore. We just finished 8 weeks, 5 of them in production of the Dickens Fair, where I managed 30 plus tour guides for the tours of London. And I created this gig because a number of years back, there was no Pickwick Club really doing a lot of scenes through the fair. And I was playing Jingle, Alfred Jingle Esquire, which I started playing in about 79 from Pickwick Papers. I needed a gig in between. So I started surreptitiously doing these tours of the Dickens Fair, tours of London, mainly for friends. And then I had friends bring their friends and family, and it became a thing. And I talked them into, in 2018, 2019, letting me actually try to develop this as a side gig. So I kind of imagineered a new ride for Dickens. And I'm a history where Pickwick had ended, the story had ended. Now Pickwick had died, and Jingle and Job Trotter have come back to London because Job Trotter's got a malady that they can't cure in Van Diemen's Land. So London's the only place for surgery, and it's stated in Pickwick's estate and trust that should Jingle return, that he be set up in business as long as no cash is involved, because that got him into debtor's prison. So I'm just advancing from Dickens stuff and used it as a history because that's what we were taught to do. We're taught to create a history for your character. That way you are exhausted after performing for 6, 8, 10 hours, and you've exhausted all your bits and fallbacks, that you can always go to your history and your relationship to other characters that you've developed. And for me, because I teach actors, this is something that I can always draw on that helps solidify a character for someone. You find the history, then you find the psychological gesture, as Michael Chekhov would say. You find the physicalizations, and you put it all together for a performance that is pretty solid. And that, to me, is one of the big gifts that I've received from doing my fair work.
Do you have, looking back over your career, your fair career especially, do you have a favorite prop that you remember with affection?
Uncle Dave, Dave Springhorn, made a bauble that looked just like me, like my full character. And there've been a number of props over the years. More recently, my horn for the tours, which unfortunately got stolen out of my car Monday night, which is heartbreaking, and my sign that says Jingles Tours of London. I've come and gone from fair over the years. Like I mentioned, I started in 73, 74, worked Southern Fair, and then started going to the Northern Fair in 77 and falling in love with Black Point, and then Dickens in 78 and 79. About 80, I think that was maybe my last fair for some time, because in 81 I happened into an opportunity to screen test for a major motion picture and returned to Hollywood with an agent, and didn't do any fair until about 87. Kevin Patterson asked if I would come and help run the horse tournament along David Springhorn. So I was the herald. And that went fairly well until I saw one of the knights get kind of run through and fall off his horse. I thought he was a goner. And here I am facing an audience with possibly a death and a terrible tragic accident. Luckily, the tabor, whatever it is, the pike went under his armor and just skinned the side of his body. He wasn't run through, thank God. From my vantage, it looked like he was a goner. So I backed off after that. I said, no,
What was your first thing you said to the audience upon realizing there was a problem?
This is but sport, and this is the way of this sport. And I don't remember exactly. I covered as best I could while turning white, I'm sure. And then in I think it was about 99 or 2000, I was needing to kind of get away from Los Angeles and Hollywood, where I'd had some misfires and bad experience with the Back to the Future movies, with being caught in the middle of a legal battle, and helping Crispin get his settlement turned into blowing up my face, kind of. and Kevin came to Uncle Dave and I and asked if we would help him. He was going to open a fair at Heart of the Forest in Santa Barbara and then Stafford Lake. And so I actually moved north in, I think it was 2001, 2002, and started playing Touchstone, the mascot for those fairs, and did some really fun shows. Billy Scudder directed a parody commedia version of Taming of the Shrew called Shrew, where I got to work with Sandy Grin, Cock and Feathers. Some wonderful physical work and wonderful cast. Doreen Wiley, and the cast was chock full of wonderful people. Billy cast very well. That was a great memory. And those fairs also were delightful because they harkened back to that kind of disciplined, this is a fair without the commercialization so much. And the Queen's Court was gorgeous and the locations were beautiful. And I finally got my parents to come see me at a fair. So 40 some odd years after I ran away from home to be at the fair. They finally came to the Santa Barbara Fair, and that was a thrill for me. And they loved it. They absolutely loved it.
Did your grandmother ever come to see you at fair?
No, no, she did come see me. I remember play Daniel Berrigan in the Trial of the Catonsville Nine in '75, and I was so thrilled she finally made it to one of my shows. I jumped off stage after the curtain call, and someone grabbed my arm, and it was Jane Fonda, who said, "Oh, I really like your acting." I was like, "Oh, I like yours too." And then I went over to hug and kiss my grandmother. My grandmother said, "Hey, wasn't that Jane Fonda?" I said, "Yeah, yeah." Anyway,
This happens all the time, Grandma. Don't worry about it.
well, her daughter also went to the alternative school that I was at, so it made sense that she was there. Anyway, so I have many years of ups and downs with the fair and ins and outs, and it's sort of like almost a security blanket at times. For 11 years after returning to Northern California and then starting doing the Dickens Fair again, I got a gig as the hobo that lives on top of the train for the Polar Express production for the California Railroad Museum in Sacramento. And I did that for 11 years. And that went away. And since then, I've been back, doing the jingle again at the fair and tours of London. Next year, I'd like to really have Robert Louis Stevenson represented. See if I could maybe have a storefront to be Dr. Jekyll and do the transformation scene into Mr. Hyde a few times during the day, and then lead tours. Have a card. One side is Hyde's tour, and the other is Dr. Jekyll's tour. I don't know.
And you have a different route for each character?
Oh yes. Oh,
very cool. Do you have any sort of life lessons that you've learned at fair?
Well, the lesson that Phyllis turned the fair into, I think Ron and Phyllis had a great concept for it being originally a children's fair and with the original Commedia cart. And it became so many things on so many levels besides her idea of educating while entertaining. It rebirthed, I think, the folk art movement. It helped with culinary arts. It helped integrate inclusiveness. I have to admit that at first in those 70s, their inclusiveness was pretty radical. You had some really strange, questionable gypsies and maybe outlaws even, and it wasn't a place that people were ejected from. I think if you were caught, you were ejected, but most of the time people got away with things. They were allowed to be themselves as long as they weren't hurting others. And then, unfortunately, a lot of folk flew under the wire, and over the years, things that were not reported festered, and that had blown up in most recent history. And the fair management had to addressing it on many levels. And it's great to see the growth and the healing that is going on. It's an ongoing process, and now will never be not growing and in progress and process. And there's a lot to learn about life. I learned very quickly getting myself into very uncomfortable situations, being stretched thin, being desperate, abusing myself, and learning my boundaries. And luckily, there's a lot of people that have a lot of compassion, that do the fairs, that look out for each other, and now more than ever do that. And it's a really wonderful thing. And I think that combined with the celebration of humanity, history, cultures, and innovation through imagination, it's still going to be a thriving thing after we're gone, and I think will benefit future generations.
That sounds like an excellent way to end this interview. So, is there anything else?
I forgot to mention this when I directed the music hall. When I came back to Fair, Dickens Fair, I was offered directing the music hall, which is not an easy task. And for I think it was the second season I did that, I brought Judy Corey in as a guest star. And she hadn't done music hall in years and years, but she brought her old pianist in, Ellen
Mm-hmm.
Hoffman. And she performed her Hold Your Hand Out, Naughty Boy, and was masterful and just owned the house. And it was so wonderful to see Dame Judith in her element. And Ellen Hoffman, who hadn't done Fair in 20 some odd years, she's been back since that day. She came back to Fair. It was an example of how folk come and go at the fair.
I interviewed Judy and I sort of took one of her points in one of my questions to you. And she really, from the start, wanted the audience to participate in the fair. And she wanted to set it up not in a hateful or make fun of them way, but she wanted everyone to succeed. And
Yes.
so she engineered it that you could not fail if you got on stage with Judy. And because she did it at the start of the fair, people are still doing some of her same stuff 40 years later who've never heard of Agora, but sort of have this ethos of if you pull someone up on stage at the fair, you're not going to make fun of them, but they will have fun. And their fun gets translated out to the audience. So to me, she's one of the real pioneers.
And it's also a rule of thumb for really great improv. I helped form Los Angeles Theater Sports back in 88, 89. And then we immediately started a children's version of it called Kid Prov. We had a sketch called Hero for a Day, where you interview the kid and find out what they want to do, what's their dream. If they want to be an astronaut, if they want to be bullfighter, whatever you supply it and you work that scene around them, and they're the hero for the day. And you bring that same to the fair, to everything you do. Also, the term fail gracefully, dare to fail, is you'll find in Johnstonian improv and also with other improv training is key. Another thing I never mentioned was that the fair led me to a lot of other gigs.
Oh, yeah.
I was at the fair back in 2019, and Don Carson said, "I think I have a picture of you from the Academy of Art in 1980 or 1979." I was like, "Huh?" And sure enough, he found a picture of me modeling for the drawing department. And through the fair, I've helped entertain at wineries. And I remember one of the first times I carried a chair was at the Doheny Mansion up there above Sunset Boulevard for a press event for fair. So it helped me get off, not even, didn't have to always be at the fair site, but events and castles and time travel weekends we did for 5 years in Old Sac.
Uh-huh.
That's where I started playing Mark Twain. Just think of the other gifts that I've gotten from the fair. Anyway, okay, I think I'm done. And you?
I think I've run out of words, both coherent and incoherent. So I could sputter for, say, another 10 or 15 minutes, but I think the audience for that is rather limited.
Here we are again. Here we are again. Here we are again. What jolly dogs are we? Well, Dan, thank you very much for having me on.
Well, thank you very much for being so good about talking. So you put together your words well.
Easy for you to say.
I am now going to stop this recording, I think, by pushing this button. That was my December 2022 interview with Jeffrey Weissman. Questions or comments for Jeffrey can be forwarded to me at djng@earthlink.net, and I in turn will forward them to him. Questions or comments about the podcast itself can be sent to me at djng@earthlink.net. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on Fair Folk at Work, please email me at djng@earthlink.net. You can also hear Jeffrey on another one of my podcasts, Authors Reads. Jeffrey Weissman reads his poem Boy Blue. Well, that's it for this time. Thanks so much for listening. See you next time. Bye bye.